Conference now. The war has ceased, the armistice has been signed, and now we're going to figure out what the post-war World War I world will look like. We mentioned the big four: Vittorio Orlando from Italy on the left, David Lloyd George from Britain, second from the left, George Clemenceau from France, the third one, and of course Woodrow Wilson, the fourth character over here. Now, the big four are going to dictate a lot of what's going to happen at this Paris Peace Conference. And let's talk about what each one of them has in mind. This is Woodrow Wilson's moment here. Here he is arriving in Paris. And when he arrives in Paris, he gets kind of a rock star treatment. People were enthused about American support during the war. They're glad that the war is over. They see Wilson as a good guy, which is exactly what he wanted people to see him as this do-gooder. Woodrow Wilson thinks he's coming to the Paris Peace Conference to negotiate the 14 points. He sees this as an opportunity to end the war fairly, without punishing anybody, and he's going to see this as an opportunity to maybe prevent conflict in the future. He's the first U.S. sitting president to travel overseas to handle a problem like this. Prior to Woodrow Wilson, presidents didn't leave the country while they were in office. Now, Woodrow Wilson thinks he's coming over to help negotiate out the 14 points, but little does he know, other countries have different ideas. Okay? And let's talk about the French and their peace aims. The French are extremely vindictive against Germany, and they are out for blood. Ever since Germany formed and the French lost the Franco-Prussian War in Alsace and Lorraine, they have seen Germany as a threat, and they see this as the opportunity to make sure that Germany is never going to be a threat to them in the future. They're thinking about security in the long term. They're like, listen, having Germany here next to us is a problem not just for us, but for the security of all of Europe. So they're not interested in being fair like Woodrow Wilson wants them to be fair. They're out for getting security, and they want reparations. They want money from Germany for the war. Now, while France has this vindictive claim, they look at their buddy Great Britain and they're like, hey, Britain, you got our back. And Britain, their peace aims are not exactly the same as France's. Britain doesn't want a war again, and they do want Germany to kind of feel the sting of defeat. They want them to pay for the war, but at the same time, they're not really interested in punishing Germany harshly. And here's the reason why. They're thinking about the security of Europe and their position in the world. Great Britain said, listen, Germany was becoming too much of a threat, and that's obvious, and so we want to drop them down a notch. However, if France comes to dominate the European continent, that gives them a stronger position internationally and puts them in charge of situations and resources that we're not comfortable with that level of power for France. So they're like, well, we want Germany to suffer a little bit, but not too much, because we don't want France becoming overly powerful either. It's amazing how quickly those wartime alliances can kind of fall apart a little bit. Now, also at the Paris Peace Conference, our friends from Japan show up. And Japan was technically on the Allied side in World War I, but they saw it as an opportunity. Germany had some colonies out in the Pacific region, which during the war the Japanese secured very quickly. And Japan wants more than just land. They're looking for recognition as a world power. They want to be included as one of the power players of world policy, and they also would like recognition or some type of statement of racial equality. They feel like Western Europeans and Americans, the white people of the world, look down upon them as an inferior race, and they want some type of recognition of racial equality. So everybody's got different goals and aims. And there are dozens of other countries that show up. Some of them just interested in what's going on. Some of them want pieces of land. Some of them want some resources back. So ultimately, the treaty that they hammer out over several months in Paris is what we call the Treaty of Versailles. All right, it's called that because it's signed at the Versailles Palace. Incidentally, Versailles is where Kaiser Wilhelm I declared the German Empire. Now, here's a copy of the cover of a copy of the English version of the Treaty of Versailles, which is very long and drawn out. However, there's some big points here. When the treaty is finally all said and done, it's going to punish Germany. Germany's going to be the one who feels the sting of this particular treaty. And let's talk about reasons why. First, their military is going to be extremely limited. Germany's army is going to be limited to 100,000 men, which is hardly anything at all. Germany's military is strictly forbidden from having an air force because they had done quite a bit of damage with that air force. They're limited on their navy to, I think, something like a dozen warships, and none of them can be U-boats. So their military is extremely limited, and Germany is basically like, how do we defend ourselves? And European nations looked at the situation and said, well, I guess you better not make anybody angry. So that's obviously a problem. Okay. Second thing that happens in the Treaty of Versailles, war reparations. Now, war reparations are going to be a real issue. Germany, since ultimately they're on the losing side of this, according to the Allies, they're going to have to pay something in the neighborhood of $50 billion in repayments, mostly to Britain and France, for the war. Destruction of land, loss of life. Germany's going to have to foot the bill for it. And they have to pay with either gold or gold-backed currency, or if they don't have enough of that, they can also pay in usable resources like timber, coal, oil, natural gas, iron ore, things that are considered of value. All right, so Germany's feeling the sting right now. Also, they got to give up land. Of course, they've got to give back Alsace and Lorraine to France. That's a no-brainer. They also had to give up the land that they acquired from Russia when Russia exited the war. They've also have to give up sections of their the eastern portion of their country so that Poland can be formed. So they're going to have to give up a sizable chunk of land. Oh, gosh, how can it get any worse for poor Germany? Glad you asked that. They also have to accept blame for the war. Now, it gets overplayed quite a bit that this is going to be a big problem for World War II later on, but the so-called war guilt clause that Germany has to accept the blame for the war. And these things are, it's just insulting, the stuff that they add on top, one thing on top of the other. So Germany's going to be the one who really gets hurt in this particular treaty. And it's going to cause problems for them for the next decade and a half. Not only that, but Germany is going to have to deal with the loss of its colonies overseas, and Germany is going to be in a situation where they're forbidden to do other things. Like, for example, they weren't allowed to unify with Austria because they're like, it's too many Germanic peoples in one country. They lost some of the more strategic parts of their land. They weren't allowed to have their military in the western portion of their country near the French border. So it's going to be pretty difficult for Germany in the near future. Now, the rest of the Treaty of Versailles really deals a lot with the land exchange. And you see right here that they're going to break up a lot of countries. They're like, we don't want Germany too powerful. You see, they're going to lose a lot of land. You see the Russian Empire is going to lose a lot. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania are going to be formed. Poland's going to be formed. Austria-Hungary is going to be broken up, of course. The Slavs are going to get their own nation. Romania is going to get some additional land. Italy gets some additional land. And they're also going to break up the Ottoman Empire down there in the bottom right of the map. So before the war, you had all these unifications where countries were merging together. And now after the war, they're breaking up a lot of these countries to put these smaller states who are less of a threat by themselves. All right? So that's what's going to happen. Now, also, one other thing of note, too, Woodrow Wilson was very insistent upon the League of Nations. The League of Nations, that international peacekeeping group, which he thought was essential to stopping war for the future. So we'll pick up with that